Good morning, and thank you for joining us. If you're new, welcome. There is a place for you here.
We are a group of people doing our best to love God and those around us.
Our vision is to build transforming communities where everyone is included, accepted, and loved.
All of us are on a journey.
This is a place where you can ask difficult questions about faith and life.
We are here to help and support each other.
Grab a cup of coffee and make yourself at home.
If you have any questions, find someone with a green name tag. They'd be happy to help you.
Thanks for joining us.
No matter who you are or where you're from, we want you to know that you are welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for being in worship with us this morning. My name is Joey. Pleasure to meet you all and to be in worship with you all. I invite you all to stand up for our first song of worship.
Your love will I empty myself, all this world nothing, and find everything in you.
Be seated.
Good morning. My name is Michael Scott, and I'm the pastor here at Woods Chapel Blue Springs, and I want to thank you for being with us, whether you're here in person or you're watching online at home. Now, how many of you have done a dumb thing before? Yeah. Who was that? Josh? Yeah, yes. Way to be enthusiastic this morning. I love it. I think a lot of us have done stuff like that. Now, how many of you have done something dumb with money? How many of you bought something that you had like buyer's remorse over? Now, for me, it was, I was in my early 20s, and I think that's where you start to do a lot of that, or at least maybe you have some money after college, or wherever you find yourself in life that maybe you have a little bit of money. And I wasn't in the market for a car, but a buddy of mine had a Lexus LS. Now, who knows what a Lexus LS is? It's like, yeah, big money, yeah. Now, I was in finance at the time, I was a banker, and so I thought I needed a big money car. because my Ford Focus just was not going to cut it, right? There's an expectation that I needed to have a fancy car. And so these cars, it's like their flagship car. They're really expensive. And so I bought one. That was used, so I didn't buy it brand new because these cars are like $70,000 to $90,000. And so I bought it a few years old, and I'm driving it, and I don't know, you ever bought something where you're like, I have arrived? You know that feeling? You're just like, like as if things can give us that feeling. But I was a young man, and I grew up with not a whole lot in life, and so this was big for me. I had, in my mind at least, I thought I'd made it at some point or at some level. And I did dearly love that car, but the first thing I did, what's the first thing we do when we buy something we really like? Show it off, right? Like that's really where you get the high from. That's the fun part, is you go and show it to your friends, right? So I'd go drive around and show it to my buddies. I'm like, this car is so much fun, look what it can do. And so, but I learned a quick lesson. After about a year of driving, it was used. So it was newer, but it had high mileage for its year, and so it was only a few years old. And I took it in for, I don't remember if it was 65 or 75,000 miles, whatever. Now, I have a guy for cars. You have a guy? Like I got a guy for everything, but I got a guy who works on our cars. So I take it into him, and I'm like, hey, let's give this a tune-up or whatever it needed. This is, 20 years ago. And I pulled it, and he's like, I can change the oil. I'm like, okay, that's a start. What about the other things? And he's like, yeah, we don't work on those here. And so he pops the hood, he goes, look, and he pops the hood, and it's just solid plastic. Like, you can't even see the motor. Right? Like you have to take off the top of the engine compartment just to get down to the motor. He's like, we don't work on these. You have the computers and all this fancy stuff. You got to take it to the dealership. And I was like, uh-oh. So I take it to the dealership. Now, who's been down this road? Your car's too new, or they don't have the right equipment. You got to take it to the dealership. What does that mean? Cha-ching, right? More big money. And so, of course, I had the flagship Lexus, and I go in, and I take it to them, and they're like, I'm expecting to see a list of things that it needs, like they always do, right? Here's the service requirements, and it needed maybe a timing belt and tune-up and everything else. And $4,300 later, right? They're like, you need to do this, and I'm like, I'm not. What? No, I don't. I buy cars for $4,000. I'm not that one, of course, but like I'm not gonna $4,000. Have y'all experienced this? And I learned a very valuable lesson that day. What was that lesson? With big money cars comes big money maintenance. And so, we'll come back to that. I might end up selling that car, but how many of you have done that? You find yourself in a situation and you're like, man, I wish I would not have done that. That was dumb. I don't normally like to say that word, but because it's fun to say wisdom and use dumb as part of it, then we're given analogies of dumb things that we've done that we've learned lessons through. Because there's two ways we learn. There's like North Star, like here's the right way to do things, right? And then there's this other thing called a South Star, right? Here's the way we don't do things. Now, how do you guys learn? Do you learn from just the good things you're supposed to do? I'm stubborn, not always. From our mistakes. That's what I tell my kids. I might learn from my mistakes so you don't have to make them, but they love making them, and so I let them. And isn't that right, Bri? These are things that we struggle with, and today we're going to continue on in that series of wisdom, things that we learn, and often we learn them from the Bible. There's good things that we can learn from the Bible. There's things that we shouldn't do from the Bible. In the church world, we have what we call wisdom literature. Now, these are 3 books in the Bible. It's Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. And they're stories and sayings about what we can learn from, and we've been focusing on those certain sayings. Now, last week we started with Proverbs 1, right? So Proverbs is attributed to King Solomon. Solomon was this wise king, very, very wise. And he said, when you start, this book is for all people. He says it's for the young people, so they won't make mistakes. But it's even for the more experienced, who think they have it all figured out. It's even for you all. So it's for everybody, this book. And he says, the thing that we have to start with, the very first thing we start with when it comes to wisdom is what? Who was here last week? Nobody. Perfect. If you're at home, type it in. I'll come back, I read the comments. The first thing we do is bow. That's literally how the first book of Proverbs starts with, by bowing to God. Now, what was bowing? If you weren't here last week, bowing is this act of submitting or letting something teach you, right? So you bow to it. You let our circumstance and things teach us. So by bowing to God, we also bowing to the things and the circumstance we find ourselves in life. Now, after service, Carrie Heilman came up to me. She's like, oh my gosh, I wanted to scream from the audience. She goes, you know when you bow? She does research science stuff. I know she's here somewhere. I can barely see. So wherever you are, Carrie, she comes in and she goes, when you bow, she goes, it actually has like a calming effect. Something to do with the carotid artery or something when you lean forward. I don't know. I wasn't really listening. And so, that's true. I was listening. But there's something to bowing that actually calms you, right? So the next time your spouse is yelling at you and everything, don't say calm down. Just say bow. Don't do that. For more marriage advice, follow me on, anyway, no. But there is this calming effect that it has. And really what the story is telling us is that when we approach a situation, whether it be good or bad, we have an opportunity to choose to let it teach us. And when we bow to things, even things that are rough and difficult in life, when we bow to them, we let them teach us. We allow God to work through that to teach us life lessons. That's what it means to begin to learn, to begin with wisdom. Now, next week, we're going to dig into time. How many of you feel like you have all the time in the world? Yeah, nobody. Our last week, we were talking about words. Today, I want to focus on generosity. I want to focus on our money. And I want to focus on the things that does to us. How do we gain wisdom with the way that we spend our money? I was actually talking to somebody before service, and I was ranting about hospitals. And he's a physician, so probably not the person to rant to about this. But we were talking about hospitals, and I was like, yeah, when all the nonprofits sold in the 90s, it all went to hell, right? I was just like, it's all going downhill from there. And he's like, actually, that's not true. He says, nonprofits actually waste a lot of money, and it's actually not good. And I was like, what? I had this big epiphany. I'm like, really? I thought part of our problem was that nonprofits and churches got out of the medical field. And he's like, that's just not true. How do we spend our money? And he's like, nonprofits are notorious for not spending their money well. And I'm like, well, that's sad, because nonprofits are the mechanism we use in our culture to help other people. These are the mechanisms that we teach how to be better, how to gain wisdom, but it's also the mechanisms we use to help people along on their journey who may be struggling with food insecurity or housing insecurity or whatever insecurity they're struggling with. Nonprofits are the vehicles we use to meet those needs. So how is it that we are utilizing our resources? How can we find wisdom in the resources at our disposal? Now, I think our default, our human nature, is to collect things or to do things out of selfishness, right? The Bible describes this in great detail over and over and over again, where we have this situation where we find ourselves that maybe we like to take things, we like to buy them, and to buy them for ourselves. Now, how many of you like to buy things? Some people do, some people don't. I think maybe it's just in different areas. I think we all maybe like to buy stuff. I love to buy tools. Any tool people in the room? I have a lot of tools in my garage that I don't need, but they're sitting there because I like to have tools, because you never know when you're going to need a tool, right? It's true. And the second I've ever gotten rid of tools or donated them or sold them or whatever else it is, you know what always happens, right? The next week, that's when I need the tool. Like it's like Murphy's Law. It always happens that way. But we buy things, or we acquire things, or we do things, or we take vacation, whatever it is, whatever way we spend our resources, that has a physical benefit to us. So you can use the language that we were created in such a way that when we do things like buy new stuff, or take vacations, or whatever it is that we do, new cars, suits, clothes, boots, tools, there is something that happens in our brain, whether it's a release of dopamine or some kind of drug that our brain releases that says, ooh, that's good, you should do that more. This is the same drug that helps us or assists us down the pathway of being addicted to things. Now, these are all rooted, and I talked about this a lot, I know you've heard it from me before, but all these things are rooted in our primal brain, right? So there's also part of the brain where we encounter something we don't like, and then we go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? This is the part of the brain that says warning, danger. Will Robinson, some of you know what that means. And it tells us, it protects us, right? It's the ego, it's the self, it's the subconscious protecting us. Well, that's a warning system. There's also a reward system. So when we do certain things, our brain says, ooh, let's do that. Like when you eat. I love to eat. I know you can't tell, but I love to eat. I consider myself a foodie. When we eat, like there's something going on in our brain. I didn't grow up with a lot of things. So my brain has been programmed that when I get new things, what do? Oh, that's fun. Not because I needed the thing, but because it's about buying the thing. There's a reward system in our brain that rewards us. Now, it's rooted in primal stuff, right? Like you needed to eat at some point because if you forgot to eat, you would die. Like now we don't struggle with that, but our ancient brains, these are the things that we struggled with. And so we're accessing our ancient brain when we're tapping into these biological reward systems. I think faith takes us in a direction and a path that counteracts our biology. So it's counterintuitive to who we are in our humanity. Because our humanity, these things can be good. They protect us. They take care of us. They tell us to eat. They tell us all the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have things that drive that cause us to do things. But like anything, they can be in excess. When we are engaging in certain things, they can be in excess, and then we let those drivers, the subconscious things that we're not even aware of, take over our lives. And we wake up one day, and we're like, why do I have a garage full of tools? Or how many of you like shoes? I'll include myself in this. I like boots. I got like 4 pair. I have lots of shoes. I like shoes, right? Because you need a shoe for every outfit. That's my feminine. I shouldn't say that. It's not just feminine. That's my side that I like to wear nice things. But you ever bought a pair of boots or a pair of shoes that you're just like, I have at least one pair. My wife got them for me. It was my first pair. She bought me for a holiday, maybe a birthday or for Christmas. And they're rather expensive. And so I won't say how much because it's ridiculous. But she bought them, and I'm wearing these boots. And one of my kids is coming by, ice cream popsicle, and guess what happens? Spills on the boot, right? Now, what happens when your kid or somebody spills something on your $300 boots? Exactly. I don't know what you said, but yes. Okay. Yeah. That's what you want to do. So what's happening? Now we care more about a boot than we do a child or another human being. Our nature when we buy things, not only does it give us some kind of reward, but when we buy and collect things, at some point our mind shifts. And it shifts into preservation mode. Oh, I have to preserve this way of life that I need. I have to preserve these boots or these clothes or this Lexus or this really nice house, right? So instead of having my buddies over and driving around in my Lexus, what was I worried about the whole time? Like take the knife out of your pocket knife out of your pocket so you don't cut my expensive Italian leather seats. I think this is our nature. So when I talk about something that's counterintuitive or counter to our nature, which I believe faith and God are counter to our nature. This is the war that is within us. That when we gain wisdom, when we read about wisdom in the Bible, we read about ways in which we can counteract those things that are our nature and things that we will naturally do, because left to ourselves, that is the path that we will take. If that's not a path you will take, then I think you should ask yourself some very hard questions. I think all of us find, maybe not that exact path, but we find ourselves in situations where we will take a certain direction, whatever's in our default, and our default is always to take care of self first, right? Our needs before others. It's counterintuitive to say, no, everything is at play here. Everyone is at work. We can all work together to do something. So I want to read a few verses in the Bible today about what that looks like. I moved that all the way back there. I can't read it when it's back there. Okay. So, Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Psalms. I'll be reading for both Psalms and Proverbs. Nope. Proverbs and Ecclesiastes today. So last week we read Proverbs 1. Where do we start? We start with bowing, right? Letting things teach us, letting situations work in our lives for the good of all, right? All things work for the good and glory of God. That's a scripture that Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote. It's another way of saying that. I'm going to read from Proverbs 11 today. It says, one shares liberally and yet gains even more, while another hoards more than what is right and still has need. So a lot of the Proverbs are just sayings, right? Wherever you go, there you are. Like stuff like, not like that, but they're just sayings that Solomon compiled into a book. And this one I like because it's 11 verse 24. One shares liberally and yet gains even more. So one who is free with things, one who lets go of things, one who doesn't have to buy all the time to get the dopamine hit, one who doesn't have to collect things and then preserve them, gains even more. While those who do hoard things, those who are collecting things, they still have need. Now, why is that? I want to go to the next verse too. It says, a giving person will receive much in return, and someone who gives water will also receive the water he or she needs. So one who gives much receives much. Now, I want to come back to that in a minute, because when I read that, it leads me to an interesting place that I think a lot of us go. Who here has heard the term prosperity gospel? It's the idea, well, we're going to come back to that. Let's come back to that. Let's go to Ecclesiastes next. I'm going to read from chapter 5, starting in verse 10. It says, "The one who loves money is never satisfied with money." Have you ever loved money? Money or things, power, they're all interconnected. One who loves those things is never satisfied. There's never enough. Nor the one who loves wealth with big profits. And then he says more smoke. Now the author of Ecclesiastes starts out Ecclesiastes and he says, life is nothing but mist, right? Like think of a mister or smoke. Life is fleeting, it dissipates, we all end up in the same place. And so he comes back to this idea of it's all smoke or it's all mist over and over again. So he's saying these things they don't mean anything. The more loot you get, the more looters show up. And what fun is that? To be robbed in broad daylight? Hard and honest work earns a good night's sleep. Whether supper is beans or steak, you can still earn a good night's sleep. But a rich man's belly gives him insomnia. Now, what is the author getting at by saying this? Now, beans, if you're eating beans, you're considered poor. You don't have a lot, right? If you're eating steak, then you have an abundance. You have a lot. And the author is saying, and he's telling this story, he says, whether you're rich or poor, it's all smoke. We all end up in the same place. He actually tells this story of a person who loses everything. I'm not going to go into all those details. And he says, at the end of the day, we all end up in the same place. 6 feet underground, right? We all end up in the same place. We come to this world naked, and naked we will leave is actually the term that he uses. But he uses this, what fun is it to be robbed in daylight? He says, hard and honest work earns a good night's sleep, whether supper is beans or steak. But a rich man, his belly gives him insomnia. He's saying when we accumulate things, when we take things only for ourselves, when we save up and buy that really expensive Lexus, that gives us insomnia. Why? Because it's one of two things. Either we want more, which is, I think, one of our defaults, or we just end up worrying about protecting it. It gives us insomnia because we're worried about losing it. And he talks about this, of being robbed. Who here has a security system on their car or their house? The nicer your car, the nicer your house, probably the more expensive your security system. Why? Because we want to preserve it. I'm not saying you should not preserve your stuff. I realize that this argument breaks down at some point. I mean, we do need money in society. We do need money in culture. And we need people to make money to be able to give it freely, to be able to do the work in which we were called to do. But this is the direction that this author is leading us towards. In general, when we begin to collect stuff and we work so hard to preserve it, we spend money to preserve it, we're missing the point. That is pointless. It's like smoke or mist. And I see a lot of that in our culture right now, in our communities. A lot of it. None of us live in the moment. We all have, most people have some kind of, we all have retirement of some kind. We all pay into a social security system, right? Whether it's going to be there or not when we retire, who knows? That's a different sermon. But we all find ourselves hoarding and collecting things and then worrying about them. He says, after looking at the ways things are in this earth, here's what I've decided. This is the best way to live. Take care of yourself, have a good time, and make the most of whatever job you have for as long as God gives you life. And that's about it. That's the human lot. Yes, we should make the most of what God gives, both the bounty and the capacity to enjoy it. Accepting what's been given and delighting in the work. It's God's gift. God deals out joy in the present, the now. Now that's an interesting statement. How many of you think that you work for the paycheck? Isn't that culturally what we tend to do? We do something for what we think we're going to get out of it. What this author is saying to us, what he's challenging, is that it's not about what you're going to get out of it, right? Because what do we think? If we work hard enough, we can get the next thing that we need, and that's going to bring some kind of joy to our life. If I can just get that Lexus, or those next pair of boots, or that bigger and fancier house, right? It's going to bring some kind of joy to our life. Now, is that joy? It might be some twisted form of happiness, but that's hormones in your brain, right? These are receptors that are going off, and it's temporary, it's fleeting. What this author is saying is it's not in that, it's not in the result of work, but it's in the work itself that we find joy, in the present. Now, I am going to dig deep, deep into being present and time and what time means, what eternity means next week, but we are touching on it just briefly now because the joy of life is experienced in our work and in the things we do, not what we get from them. But again, that's counterintuitive to the way we think and operate. We think if we just work just a little bit harder. How many of you would consider yourself like an achiever? I struggle with having to achieve in my life. There's some kind of value system when I grew up, when I was poor, and that I have to achieve in order for you all to love me. If I don't achieve things, I don't think that people love me. And so I think in my brain, I'm wired as such that I have to do things over and over and over again and keep achieving things in order for you all to love me. Now, it's ridiculous, right? But it's that ridiculousness that we struggle with in life. We are programmed a certain way. We have upbringing. We were raised in a certain way, in a certain culture, and that is programmed into us. But there's something else. You see, we don't have to just be what is programmed into us. We don't have to just be a result of our environment or the way in which we were born. There's something else. There's something else that I would consider spiritual in nature. There's something that supersedes those default settings of ours. There's a different way of life. There's a different way to look at things. And I hope each week that we talk about those. And if we're being honest, how many of you love talking about money in church? You don't like it, do you? It's uncomfortable. And I say this over and over again. I am actually here to make you uncomfortable. I'm here to inflict pain on the comfortable, right? What is it? Inflict pain on the comfortable and comfort the afflicted or something like that? Like that's the saying? Because it's counterintuitive to who we are. And it's when we access those certain things, is when we practice that faith or that different way of life, that we are accessing our spirit. It's when we are accessing God. It's when we're becoming one. It's when we are fulfilling the purpose in which we were born and created. And these things are always counterintuitive to ourself, to who we are in our humanity. You know, Jesus talked more about money and possessions than anything else in the Bible. When we read about the stories, they're always tied back to money and our possessions because these things dictate and drive our lives. And they can spiral, and they can take over everything. And we don't even know it, but they are driving our brain. Our subconscious drives our minds. And when we feel like we have to buy the next thing or be the next thing or accomplish the next thing, it's what drives us. And we wake up one day and we go, what are we doing? Why do I think I need all this stuff? Why is my garage full of tools or my closet full of shoes? You see, there's something there. And the way we access that thing, the way we curb that, the way we change that is by accessing God and accessing our spirit, the other side to us, the counterintuitive side. Now, how do we do that? How do we access that? How do we appreciate that the work is the important part, not the results of the work? Because that's counterintuitive. How many of you want to go to work and just be like, oh, I'm happy because I'm just here? How many of you actually want to do that? The answer is nobody. Nobody likes to do that. I try to convince a lot of you to come to work for church because that's really where we're at, right? No, you're going to love it. It's going to be great, but we can't pay you, right? That is the nature of the nonprofit world to a point, right? We want you to come give back. The nonprofit world is the vehicle in which you can come together and to help those around us. But it's a struggle. So how do we do that? How do we find in the moment, how do we give that away? How do we let our resources flow through us? How many are familiar with the, see, that's why I write this stuff down, the laws of conservation of energy? Any scientists, engineers in the room? So I went to school to be an engineer originally. did an internship, decided I didn't like engineering, but I do love math and science. I'm a big math and science nerd. If I watch TV, I don't watch sitcoms and shows. I watch like sciencey stuff. I love the big universe. Anyway, I love knowing how things work. So the laws of preservation of energy state that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Have you heard this? Maybe in high school or college. You cannot create or destroy energy. Energy only transfers from one form to another. So sunlight, we feel the sunlight, and what does that do? It warms. So these rays of sun, and actually light's a bad example because we're not really sure what light is. We still don't exactly know what light is. Is it a ray? Is it a particle? Is it whatever? So that sunshine warms things. So it transfers from a ray of sunshine into warmth. The energy changes. And this is true with all things in life. And the more dense they are, the more mass that they have, the more energy they have built up or stored inside of them. And so we know in our natural world, we don't create or destroy anything. Things just go and they change from one form to another. Right? They're eternal. And so I believe this is also true with all of our resources. It's not just when we read about science. Like all of our resources, they're not never ending. They are eternal. They just transfer from one form to another. And so we all have access to resources. Say you are a carpenter, or say you're a lumberjack, and you wanted to go cut down a tree. What are you going to do? You're going to take that tree, you're going to sell it to somebody who's going to turn it into lumber, and the carpenter is going to take that lumber, he's going to turn it into a house, and so on and so forth. What faith tells us, what our spirit tells us, what God is inviting us into the space is that there are plenty of resources in this life. We're not creating new resources. We're also, well, that's a bad way to say it, but we're not destroying them. We are, but you see the analogy, right? We don't create or destroy, let's use a different term. We don't create or destroy wealth. Resources are. And it's our job to then be responsible for those resources. You don't own all the trees or the air or whatever it is, whatever building block of life we use to make something else. That is not owned by us. So when we read about the resources of life and God giving us things, these are God-given things. These are the resources, and they're abundant. And there's plenty of them. In a prosperity gospel, when you read some of these verses, it's easy to read a verse and say that one who gives a lot receives a lot. It's easy to read that and think that's a formula. How many of you have heard that? You've read that, it's a promise that God gives us in the Bible, that if you give a lot, you receive a lot. And I don't think that is I don't think at all that is what God is inviting us into. I don't believe that if you give a lot, you're going to get a lot, because then the motivation to give is to get, and that ceases to be a charitable act. Now you're doing that out of self-preservation. It's a conundrum. That can't exist. I believe when we read those verses, those who give a lot receive a lot, what they're really saying is when we realize that resources are abundant and that they're everywhere, and they are not ours to control, but ours to let pass through us, to use and to share with those around us, that we realize we don't need more. You see, that awareness helps us to realize that we actually need less. So the analogy is that if you give more, you get more. But the reality is, as we're generous and as things flow through us, as we stop damming up our resources to collect them and to gather them, as they flow through us onto other people, onto other things, that this changes us. And we realize when there's an abundance and not a scarcity, that changes us to realize that we don't need to collect and gather so much. I believe that process actually allows us to live on less, to need less, to want less. You see, the act of giving helps you to realize that you don't need as much. Things flow through us. Resources are abundant. And it is our job to access those and to share them. Not to create wealth, not to destroy wealth, but to let them flow through us equally and freely to those around us. And that realization helps us to realize that we need less. We don't need Lexuses or fancy boots or the fancy car or job. There's this analogy that Jesus gives in Matthew 6. He's talking to his disciples. He says, don't store treasures for yourself here on earth. Because treasures on earth, what happens to them? They decay or they're stolen or moths get to them is actually his analogy. He says, instead, I want you to store up treasures in heaven where they don't decay. Now, what the heck does that mean? He ends that phrase, he ends that story with wherever your treasure is, that is where your heart will be also. So how can we store up treasures in heaven? How can we actually do that? How can we not collect them here and gather them here? Because we don't know where heaven is. We don't know exactly what heaven is. Now, to give you some context of what Jesus would have been talking about, heaven wasn't the place that you went to after you died. That is one description of heaven, a place you go in an afterlife. But the word heaven simply meant the beyond, the sky, the place we look up to, the thing we aspire to. And to give up and to store up treasures in heaven, I believe what Jesus was talking about, are giving things freely, letting them flow through us, and not even knowing what the outcome is going to be. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm driving with a friend a few weeks ago, and we're in my car, and we're driving along, and we're in a neighborhood. And we're pulling up, and I was like, what is that? And it's a lemonade stand. How many of you ever did a lemonade stand when you were a kid? I had one. You ever bought lemonade from a lemonade stand? Yeah, it's awful. It's never good. No, I'm just kidding. We pull up to it, and he gets some money out, and he asks the kid, hey, how much is this? And she tells him, and he gives some money. He says, hey, give it to somebody who might need this. Now, did he know exactly where that money was going to go? Did he know exactly where the lemonade was going to go? I mean, no. He said to give it to somebody who needs it. Our generosity, the counterintuitive things that we practice, are leading us away from a certain way of life and into a generous life. To store up treasures in heaven, I believe, means to let go. To let go of the things we want to hoard and control and keep in our grasp. To let them go to the beyond, to the heavens, and not stress and worry about it. Now, don't hear me wrong. That conversation I had before church, it frustrates me that there are nonprofits out there who don't use money in a healthy way. We are an organization that uses it in a very healthy, a very structured, a very proactive way in the community. I'm not talking about that. We definitely need checks and balances with our systems. What I'm talking about is in your soul and in your heart, are you holding on to things? Are you storing them up here, or are you letting them go? Are you allowing them to be and to help and to pass through you to those around you who need it? You know, I'm sitting there at the dealership in my fancy Lexus driving off, not spending the $4,300 because I refused. Thinking about, what am I going to do? I couldn't afford it. I didn't have the money. I had a young child. I was a single dad at the time. And so I made the tough decision. You see, I had another car. I had a Ford Focus. And I'm sorry if you like Ford Focuses, when you're comparing the two, it's like Ford Focus, Lexus LS, right? But what's that about? What's happening there? My ego's like, I can't sell this and drive this. Of course you can. I ended up selling that car. I remember showing up at the office in my Ford Focus, and I was like, oh, the walk of shame, right? Nobody cared. Nobody cared what car I drove. Y'all, we got to let go. We got to let go of this need, or whatever it is that's inside of us to want these things, to collect these things. I want us to be a group of people where generosity and resources and things just flow right through us. They come to us. Call it God-given, call it blessed, call it whatever you want, but they come to us, or we take them, whatever it is, and that we're free with them. And this week, you're going to come across a lemonade stand in your life. I don't know if that's an actual lemonade stand, or I don't know if it's a waitress or a waiter at a restaurant. And some generosity is going to need to flow through you. And you're going to see that lemonade stand or that person who's having a bad day at the restaurant, and you're going to feel something in your heart, and it's going to tug at you just a little bit. You guys know what I'm talking about? That little tug when you see somebody who's having a bad day, and you're going to listen to that. And you're going to say, I'm going to be a person that allows this resource to flow through me. and you're going to be generous. This is the life that Solomon, this is the life that Jesus is inviting us into. And as you become more aware of that, I believe that we physically become less selfish and more generous. And what that looks like for me is different than what it looks like for you. But this week, my challenge to you is to be aware of that. To be aware that there are people all around us who need your generosity, who need your resources. As you think on that and ways to engage that, to access God and Spirit, let's go to God in prayer. God, we thank you for this wonderful day. We thank you for the opportunity to live a generous life. God, we know that is counterintuitive to everything that we are. And God, we just struggle with it. It's not easy. We make it about us. And God, even when we're charitable, we want to restrict it. We want to say, oh, I want it to only be used for this. God, help us to be free with our resources, to give freely, to let go. God, not to be irresponsible, just to be responsible, but to love on all those around us with everything that we have and everything that we are. God, help us to find wisdom in all the things that you have entrusted in us, because they're not ours. They are yours. God, and as we encounter those situations, those people, those resources, God, help us to be transparent in the way that we operate with them. May they flow through us from our hands to the hands of those around us. We pray all these things in your name. Amen.
I invite you to stand up for our last song in worship this morning. And during the sermon, I just felt a call to just repeat this song. It's called I Surrender. Is that okay if we do that? If we repeat that song? It speaks to the sermon so well and to the words that Michael said. And I just want to share the scripture here. It's Luke 9:23. Then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. The scripture is set after the 12 disciples are sent out village by village with specific rules to be followed. Jesus gave them amazing power and authority to heal and just drive even the demons out of people or the fears or the worries. They were asked to bring nothing with them on their journey. Jesus set the standard, John 3:15, that whoever believes in him might have eternal life in him. Surrender everything you have, surrender everything you are, and watch the worries just crumble away. And this just speaks so much to this song right here. It's just all about surrendering yourself and giving in to God's presence. So as we sing this, just have that in the back of your mind. Just pray out and pour out, God, I surrender. God, give it all to you.
I will strength, but yours alone, nothing else but you alone. I find everything in you, not my will, but yours be done, not my strength, but yours alone, nothing else but you alone. I find everything in you.
May we surrender all that we are and all that we have. Go in peace. Amen.